So our clinical ops team comes well prepared. So they will have the one pager on the AORN guidelines that you can share with your clinicians, maybe put up in the break room, where everyone gets 5 seconds to sit down. And then additional offerings as well as CE courses too.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this Vendor Spotlight on First Case, we speak with Rachel Dalton, Global Manager of Medical Affairs with Cardinal Health. We've had a prior episode talking about the Protexis brand of gloves, but there's been some changes to guidelines, and there's some good studies and data behind those AORN guideline updates. We're going to dive into that today and build off of that prior podcast around the Protexis Surgical Gloves Portfolio. So stay with us. We're going to be right back with an expert, Rachel Dalton, Global Manager of Medical Affairs with Cardinal Health, up next.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining me now is Rachel Dalton, Global Manager of Medical Affairs with Cardinal Health, and we are continuing a discussion. We've had some prior podcasts, so I definitely want to point that out before we get started, to definitely go back and listen to some of the other episodes on the Protexis brand of gloves. But Rachel, you're here today to join us and kind of continue that conversation. So I want to welcome you to the podcast and maybe have you introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Justin. It's great to be here. Really excited to talk surgical gloves today. My background is as a clinician in both the OR and labor and delivery spaces, where I had the chance to use our surgical gloves every day. And then I currently work for Cardinal Health as the Manager of Global Medical Affairs, like you had spoken about. And I get to help support our clinicians on a daily basis, which is great.
Maybe talk a little bit about that, because I think, you said that you had a background as a registered nurse. I do as well. And just talk about maybe how that helps you, really kind of talk the language maybe when you're working with customers. Absolutely.
So I have experience both in the OR as a circulating nurse and as a first assist. I did a lot of deliveries, like C-section deliveries, when I worked in labor and delivery. We always scrubbed in as first assist if we were the labor nurse. And then in labor and delivery, I used surgical gloves during deliveries, along with our OBGYN or our family practice docs at sometimes that were doing the delivery.
Yeah, you got the fun job. And when I was in nursing school, that was the one everybody wanted to do.
Right? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of fun, a lot of really good days and some bad days too, as we all know, but really enjoyed my time there. And being able to have that time makes me so much better at my job now, because I can understand when a clinician has an issue and I understand how they're using our products, and it makes our products that much better to have people like myself working here every day.
Yeah. And there's also some new guidelines, which we're going to be talking about during the podcast today, which I think, it's one of the biggest reasons that First Case is here, is to help educate everybody out there, because guidelines change all the time. Sometimes when they change, it gets confusing or people kind of lose the details. And so anything that we can do to reinforce when there's changes, I think is really helpful. And I thought maybe you could also talk a little bit just about Cardinal and specifically the Protexis name before we dive into the conversation too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have been manufacturing gloves since the 1960s, and Protexis is a well-known name, especially here in the United States. We're a leading manufacturer of surgical gloves. The Protexis name actually got coined in 2011 And it comes from the image of both protection and performance. And combining those together is how we came up with Protexis, because those are the two most important pieces of a surgical glove, right?
Yeah. And I think maybe we hone in a little bit on the Protexis line and maybe do some high level re-education, because we've covered this on prior podcasts, just, talking about skin well-being and latex-free environments. And so for anybody who didn't listen to one of the earlier episodes, let's give them kind of the high level so they have a baseline as we dive into guidelines today.
Absolutely. So our Protexis line is actually quite large. We have 10 several different glove offerings that can help a clinician regardless of what type of procedure they're doing, whether it's in the OR or in another area of the facility. So we have our Protexis line, which includes the Protexis PI. Protexis PI is made with a synthetic polyisoprene, and that is made with non-latex ingredients and is free of latex and natural rubbers. And it allows for good tactile response as well as barrier protection. We have the PI Micro, which has an anti-slip finish to it, so it helps you hold on to those surgical instruments as you're utilizing them. We have orthopedic specialized gloves that are a little bit thicker, a little bit more durable. They're also good to use in the labor and delivery and in trauma cases where you have a lot of fluid. We also have our Neu-Thera line. Our Neu-Thera line helps with skin well-being. It contains a special lotion that helps to moisturize the skin and just helps with overall well-being of the skin barrier.
So let's talk about double gloving, because I remember in the early days, I'll just say it that way and try not to date myself, but I remember when the movement to non-latex was really coming to light. And double gloving back in those early days was really a struggle.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe we could just talk about double gloving. Like there's a lot of variability in practice out there. And, let's talk about that a little bit too.
Sure. So there's definitely variability in practice. If you look at studies on double gloving, the range that they give that surgeons are actually utilizing double gloving on a regular basis goes anywhere from like 20% all the way up into the upper 40s. Depending on the group that you're polling at the time. So we don't have a complete uptake of double gloving yet. And a lot of that tends to go around, people think they're going to lose dexterity and they're going to lose their tactile abilities, all of which we understand are really important for a surgeon or any clinician in that space. But there have been studies that have shown that if you give it 2 days of utilizing a double gloving procedure, all of those gripes that you thought were really going to be showstoppers, they're going to go away. You're going to get used to the sensation. You're going to realize that you still have that dexterity, that you can still feel what you're grabbing onto. And it's going to work just as well as a single glove. This information was found from a study that was done by Infection Control Today back in 2011, where they found that surgeons that transferred to double gloving were able to see the same level of tactile abilities within 2 days of switching to a double gloving routine.
It's funny that you say that, because I do think anytime you're doing like a glove conversion, because I do a lot of work with supply chain as well, there's a lot of feedback that comes on the heels of that. And, us nurses, we kind of, once we get comfortable with something, we really stick to it, and surgeons are no different. And I think it's really important to sort of think about, what kind of time we need to give for people to have a real experience. So I like that you had some studies there on 2 days. I'd never heard that before, but that's a good kind of KPI or guideline for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why we try to bring clinicians on site when they start utilizing our gloves, and especially if they're going to move to a double gloving practice, we want them to have that support and ability to have that feedback with someone to be able to work through that time frame as you adjust to really a new standard of practice.
All right, so let's start talking about the new guidelines, because that's really the focus of today's conversation, is to get everybody up to speed on that. Can you give us maybe the why behind the new guidelines, and then we can start diving into sort of the details?
Yeah, so AORN came out with new guidelines around glove changing. And the reason this came out was because they went through several studies and found that there is a 30 to 70% chance of micro tears in gloves with a prolonged case. And after doing that research, they actually pulled in the amount of time that you should be using the same glove, and then they differentiate it by procedure. So it should be changed every 60 to 150 minutes, depending on the type of procedure that you're doing.
Yeah, that's pretty significant statistically. You know, what kind of occurs to me too is like, you know, had we already kind of inherently known this, but we didn't have statistics behind it, is kind of what I'm thinking. Is like, there's a lot of people out there sort of doing best practice and they're like, yeah, that makes sense to me. But yet we still saw that variability in practice. This is why I think the importance of studies just cannot be underscored. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that too, just reflecting on what I'm saying there, but I'm sure you've experienced that.
Oh, I completely agree. I think sometimes you need someone to call it out in the room. Like you said, we've probably all seen it, right? We've all been in a procedure where you're working on something and then you realize like, oh, I have a tear in my outer glove and I need to change them. But actually determining when that timing is, when does that happen? You know, what's going on in the procedure when that happens? Is there some kind of a causation that you can link to it? Doing studies really helps you to like dive into why something is happening.
I think too, you know, I think you said 60 to 120 minutes. Do I have that right?
150. 150.
Okay. Yep. So 60 to 150 minutes. I think sometimes time goes really fast in the operating room. You know, I'm just thinking practically, how does somebody like really keep an eye on that mentally? Do you have anybody out there that has kind of said, okay, 60 to 150 minutes, you know, there is some cues for us to know that we should be changing gloves at this point?
Yeah, I know that some ORs have taken into practice where their circulating nurse will keep track of the time. You know, they're tracking time for everything else, right? So it's one more piece that you're keeping track of, and adding it into your EMR, having it be something that is part of your charting and part of your process makes it easier to keep track of that time. Because like you said, it goes so fast and it's easy to lose track.
So you had mentioned the dexterity concerns in many cases. Can we just talk about the care that goes into manufacturing the Protexis glove that sort of addresses those concerns?
Absolutely. So we have some special things that we do at Cardinal Health that help to address some of those concerns around dexterity. One of the things is that we have a special hand mold. It's proprietary and it's supposed to help align with the normal size and shape and the way that a human hand is. We also have an independent thumb design, so that's going to give you more of that dexterity between your thumb and your fingers. And then we have the actual coating on the gloves can also help with that dexterity. They're a little bit thinner in nature, like the way that they're molded together, that allows you to still be able to move your hands in the way that you need to.
So let's talk about proper donning and doffing technique with gloves. By the way, I think when I was in nursing school, doffing was like my favorite new word that I learned. But you know, I think talking through that, and again, it's another one of those areas where so easy to just take it for granted. Like I've been doing this way forever, but there are slips in technique that can really expose us to risk. So let's talk a little bit about that and the design of the Protexis glove and how it sort of supports that sort of integrity, or the integrity of the barrier that you're trying to create between the glove and the gown.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we've all practiced donning and doffing hundreds and thousands of times as OR nurses. It's something that we do multiple times a day, and even more so now with the new guidelines, right? You're probably changing out multiple times per procedure, depending on what type of procedure you're doing. So I do realize that it is second nature to a lot of clinicians, but like anything that's second nature, over time, we can kind of lose our form. We can kind of lose the thought process and being really cognizant of what we're doing as we're doing it. So one of the first things that is always important is to make sure that you're still maintaining that sterility of the glove in order to maintain your sterile barrier as well, right? So the way that you're grabbing the glove, the way that the pocket is opened, all of those pieces. The second thing that I want to point out that I think is really special to the Cardinal Health glove is that we have an interlocking beaded cuff, which is going to help prevent it from rolling down. So once you get it in place, it's going to stay in place. But because of the way that cuff is designed, when you are grabbing to don the glove, you might want to grab up a little bit higher just to prevent any tears in that glove, which could make your, procedure times off. You might have to do some additional steps. So just grabbing up a little bit higher. Again, that interlocking beaded cuff helps keep it in place. So once it's in place, it's going to stay where it needs to stay. You're not going to have any channeling, no roll down. But we do want to make sure that you're just aware of where you're grabbing as you're donning the glove.
So let's also talk about how you provide clinical operations on-site support, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times supply chain, when they're involved in, new sourcing initiatives or trials of new products, if anybody out there is not using Protexis gloves and they're hearing about these guidelines and they're seeing an opportunity, a lot of times when you talk to supply chain, as I mentioned before, that change management piece, and we talked a little bit about 2 days, but that can be kind of difficult for supply chain to manage. And I think they're constantly looking for more from their supplier partners nowadays to help execute. Because it's one thing to negotiate a contract. It's another thing to implement the contract.
Yes.
And I think this is a big differentiator for you and your company that I'd definitely like to spend a little time talking about.
Yeah. So in addition to my team, who's the medical affairs team, we have a whole team called clinical operations. And this team is boots on the ground. So when we have a customer that's going to switch over to our gloves, we send in our clinical ops team for the whole conversion. So they're going to be there in the OR suite. They're going to be helping to make sure that the clinicians are picking the correct glove. They're going to go through that donning process that we talked about to make sure that they're putting it on correctly. They're going to talk to them about double gloving, about how, choosing the correct inner and outer glove, depending on the procedure, going through the pain points of switching over and doing double gloving and how long it's going to take to feel the difference. And honestly, just being a sounding board for when a clinician is frustrated or doesn't feel like they're being heard. We're there to help them feel heard, understood, and help them through the process as they convert over. We also provide a lot of guidelines. So our clinical ops team comes well prepared. So they will have the one pager on the AOR and guidelines that you can share with your clinicians, maybe put up in the break room, where everyone gets 5 seconds to sit down. And then additional offerings as well as CE courses too.
Yeah, there are so many resources, and you were just mentioning one that we're going to be talking a lot about when we wrap up the conversation today, but the one pager on, the latest guidance on best practices related to double gloving, and glove changing, I should say, with that time 60 to 150 minutes, and also some situational considerations such as after contact with hazardous materials or equipment. And so that's another thing I love is you're coming on site and reinforcing that, but your leave behinds, continue to do that education as well. So that, what if somebody's just not working that day? How do we make sure that everybody gets the same information? It's kind of a constant challenge.
Yeah. And another nice thing too is our clinical ops people, they're really engaged with our customers. So even though they might not be on site a week or two when a surgeon who was on vacation comes back and now all of a sudden we've changed his surgical gloves, they're just a phone call away. So our customers can always reach out and be like, Dr. Anderson's back from vacation. He's really concerned about the gloves that we picked. He's not sure which ones will work best for him. We can send our clinical operations team back into the field and really help the customer through that.
So to sort of tie a bow on the conversation around the supply chain considerations, supply chain has got a large SKU library. So SKU consolidation has been a topic in healthcare supply chain for a long time. I think nursing leaders may have caught on to that, but not necessarily everybody working on the front lines understands that the more SKUs you have, the harder it is to get the right products that you want ordered. And so there's a lot of efforts in that regard. How has Cardinal tried to help lead the way for supply chain and SKU reduction?
So the great thing is those clinical operations people, they're also going to talk through that. They're going to talk through that with the manager of the OR suite. They're going to talk through that with the leadership team, with the people in part of supply chain, to talk through what's going to be appropriate for your facility. How do we reduce SKUs in a way that everyone's still going to have what they need, but we're not overcomplicating things, and make it just the most streamlined process that we can?
So speaking of resources, we talked about the one pager, and We're going to have links and all kinds of resources, web pages, videos, etc., that will be in the description for this podcast. But I want to highlight a few, especially some white papers and a podcast. And so maybe we start with Dr. Robert D. Zura. The white paper is What's Next? Focusing on surgical gloving best practice improvements for a safer and more efficient OR. Maybe some highlights from that.
Yeah, so Dr. Zura's paper really talks about what's going to be best when you're looking at surgical gloves. A lot of what we've talked about today, so double gloving, current standards and guidelines, all of that's kind of wrapped up from a surgeon's lens and his point of view within that paper.
And then also, surgical gloves, do they have you covered? I love that title, by the way. Being somebody who's into podcasting and has been doing it for over 20 years, I like that one. Do they have you covered? Is this related to, changing of gloves or double gloving? What's this one about?
Yes, this is going to talk a little bit about double gloving. It's also going to talk about the nuances of our gloves. Like, what about the glove is going to keep you safe? How do you know that what you're wearing has really got you covered and is going to make sure that you don't have the risk of cross-contamination? You don't have micro tears. Like, what's going to help you to feel confident in the gloves you're wearing?
All right. Well, there are many videos that are on your website. So as I mentioned, we'll be linking to those, but Dr. Randall Thomas has 2 white papers and a video that are on that page, as well as we kind of wrap up maybe some of the white paper and podcast resources that folks should be aware of, especially as you may want to do some due diligence of your own after listening to this podcast.
There's a lot of resources out there. They're all free for the clinicians to use. Even our CE courses that are on the site, you get 2 CE credits, which we know is good as nurses, right? Because I know a lot of them are like 0.5 or 1 credit. Our CE courses are all 2 credits. So it's a good way to work on those CEs. Plus, it'll give you a lot of really good information around double gloving and best gloving practices.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Just how do you get CEs? How do you get it, especially during times like right now when guidelines are changing? So you want it to be relevant. It's like a lot of times in the mail, I'll get that little packet and it'll be like 30 CEs. And then I start flipping through the programs that are available. They're just not even relevant to what I do. I think that's always a great call out is, hey, guidelines have changed. This is a great one for everybody to get their CEs with.
Yeah, there's some great resources out there. And then we also have all the one-pagers that we mentioned you'd be able to get through the site, as well as the podcast and some of the testimonials from physicians.
We're also going to include a link to the prior podcast that we talked about. So if you're listening now and you want to get a little bit more of a baseline on the conversation that led up to today's, that link will be in the description for this podcast as well. I also want to encourage folks to reach out to their Cardinal sales reps for more information. So maybe you're listening to this and you're driving, and so you don't necessarily have the write-up right in front of you. That's the easy button. Just reach out to your Cardinal sales rep. They'll get you pointed in the right direction. And so, Rachel, it's been a real pleasure talking to you today. And I do want to let everybody know that there's also going to be a link to free samples. So if you want to try them for yourself, make sure you click on that link and request some free samples. But is there anything, Rachel, that you'd like to add before we wrap up today? You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate your time. I recommend that everyone goes to the Cardinal Health site. From there, you're going to navigate to the surgical glove site where you're going to click on a link that says get your samples. It's a good way to test them, see if it's what you need in your facility.
That was Rachel Dalton, Global Manager of Medical Affairs with Cardinal Health, and we're really talking about some changes in new guidelines around glove changing. And there is going to be a one paper available. There'll be a link to all the resources we discussed in this podcast, but definitely that one will give you a high level summary on what's changing. And then also talking about the Protexis brand of gloves. And I do want to encourage everyone to listen to the prior podcast where we dive a lot deeper into the importance of going latex free, and also, a lot of other proper practices and the real manufacturing and the care that went into the design and manufacturing of the Protexis brand of gloves. And so just as a quick summary, we've got what's next, focusing on surgical gloving best practice improvements for a safer and more efficient OR. That's a white paper. Surgical gloves, do they have you covered? That's a podcast. And then we have 2 white papers and a video with Dr. Randall Thomas, all that and more on the Cardinal Health website. That link is going to be in the description. And there's also CE offerings. So if you want to reinforce your knowledge around the changes for glove changing and best practices, there's 2 CE programs, Double Gloving the Power of 2, and It's Time for a Change, Best Practices for Surgical Glove Changing. So those are CE offerings that you can find on the website. And if you don't have access to the write-up and the links to those resources, then just reach out to your Cardinal sales rep and they'll get you pointed in the right direction. Thank you for listening to this vendor spotlight on First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.